From insects controlled by government computers to real-life zombies being reincarnated to governments experimenting on its own citizens without them knowing. I'm Nathan from Strange Mysteries, and these are the top 10 creepiest science experiments ever performed. Number 10. Real-life zombie dogs. In the 1940s, Russian scientists managed to actually keep the severed heads of dogs alive for several hours by what they claim was an artificial blood circulation system. They even released a video showing the results, and you can see the dogs actually responding to stimuli such as taste, sound, or touch. The Russians weren't the last people to create zombie dogs, though. In 2005, American scientists did something quite similar. First, they killed dogs by literally flushing all the blood from their body. Then, they replaced the blood with a saline solution containing infused oxygen and sugar. After 3 hours, scientists gave the dogs an actual blood transfusion and a shock of electricity. The dogs were resurrected. Some of the dogs had severe medical issues, but many of them were about the same as they were when they were alive previously. The scientists hoped their research could one day be used to revive people whom lost blood too quickly in some sort of injury before help could arrive. Perhaps we could resurrect people who have been dead for several hours in the future. But would they be a zombie then? Number 9. Android insects controlled by the government. Scientists at the University of California have actually discovered a way to create android beetles. Yep, real beetles with wings that they can now control with their computers. They place a small microchip within the beetle which allows them to make the beetle do whatever they want, as well as get sensory feedback from its visual system and other senses that beetles have. The Department of Defense is hoping to use this sort of technology asset to assist with search and rescue missions and for overall government surveillance. An android insect army controlled by the government. How does that sound? Number 8. The weight of the soul. In 1901, back when medical research was a bit less ethical, Dr. Duncan McDougall wanted to prove that the human soul actually had mass and was subsequently measurable. In an extremely controversial experiment, Dr. McDougall placed 6 patients who were in the process of dying on a specially made scale. As soon as the patient died, Dr. McDougall found that each patient seemed to lose on average about 21 grams. Permanently, and that this cannot be accounted for by the loss of any sort of liquids or gases from the body. Dr. McDougall tried the same experiment on 15 dogs following their death. No change in weight was recorded. He admitted that more research needed to be done, but changed his attention to trying to photograph the soul actually leaving the human body. Unfortunately, though, he passed away in 1920 without any further breakthroughs. Today, this experiment could never be performed and thus corroborated due to intense ethical issues. So we're all just left wondering, does the soul really weigh 21 grams? Number 7. Mixing spider and sheep genes. Scientists were actually able to insert the genes of spiders into goats so that the goat's milk would then contain the protein responsible for making spider silk. Scientists were then able to harvest the goat's milk for spider silk, which they hoped to use to enhance products such as artificial limbs and bulletproof vests. Number 6. The US, Britain, and other countries test biological warfare out on their own citizens on a large scale. There's quite a bit of documented evidence of countries guinea pigging their own citizens without them knowing. For example, in 1950, the US Navy sprayed large amounts of a bacteria known as Serratia marcescens over the people of San Francisco. At the time, they thought the bacteria was harmless, but several people experienced an illness with flu-like symptoms, and at least one man died. In Britain, between 1955 and 1963, in the, quote, the fluorescent particle trials, planes dropped massive amounts of zinc cadmium sulfide on its residents. They want to know what would happen if their country was attacked by biological warfare. Afterwards, exhaustive research was done so that they could be absolutely sure that the chemical they dropped was safe after they had dropped it. These are just two of many large-scale unethical experimentation governments have done. Try Wikipediaing, quote, unethical human experimentation in the United States, unquote, for instance. The list is quite long. Fortunately, experiments like these have allegedly been halted by the government's inquiry of the government at least 50 years ago. The seeming carelessness and frequency of some of the experiments done on a large scale listed on Wikipedia are beyond the scope of what I can cover here, but they cover things such as covering cities in radiation, releasing mosquitoes and ticks over them, and a flurry of pretty insane unethical experiments on prisoners. Number 5. RFID tracking chips embedded in humans. RFIDs, or radio frequency identification chips, have already been around for quite some time. There are services that will embed a computer chip into your pet to help identify them to strangers, as well as help you track them. Yes, that's right. By injecting a small chip into your pet, you can locate them via GPS, know what they're doing, and know really whatever else technology can stuff into a chip. Sounds nifty, right? Well, until the idea of putting chips like these in humans comes along. The FDA has already approved human RFID implants. Prisons are already using RFID implants to track prisoners. Companies are looking to use the technology on employees for identification purposes. Some nuclear power plants are using it to track the location of its employees within the building. Hospitals would like to use RFID chips so that they can scan patients for their medical records, meaning they could one day be a requirement, quote, for your own safety, unquote. But how far is too far? And how would we know that an implanted chip is being used only for its intended purpose? No matter where you went, your location and information about you becomes accessible thanks to this technology. Does the idea of implanting a chip such as this in your body make you feel safe? Or just a little creeped out? Number 4. Two-headed dogs. In 1955, in Russia, Dr. Vladimir P. Dimitrov grafted the head of one smaller dog onto the torso of another larger dog. It took Dr. Dimitrov quite a few tries before he got it right, but he finally did. The two-headed dog was able to eat as well as drink from either of its two mouths. The resulting two-headed dog the doctor had made actually lived for 29 days and died due to the larger dog's body rejecting the new head. According to a January 1955 issue of Time magazine, in an article entitled Transplanted Head, began, quote, in the Soviet Oganek, Giorgio Bloch describes a sensational exhibit at a recent meeting of the Moscow Surgical Society. On the platform close to the guests of honor stood a large white dog, wagging its tail. From one side of its neck protruded the head of a small brown puppy. As the surgeons watched, the puppy's head bit the nearest white ear. The white head snarled. End quote. Number 3. You should question authority. As you'll soon learn, the CIA may have been working a bit too hard on their mind control project. Apparently, if you want someone to do something, you just need someone with enough authority to ask them. In this experiment, the results are much creepier than the methods. In 1966, Charles Hoffling, a research psychiatrist, conducted an experiment where he tested the relationships between nurses and physicians. Hoffling had a fake doctor call real nurses during the night shift and instruct them to give patients twice the maximum dosage of an unapproved drug, something that nurses shouldn't be doing. Frighteningly, 21 out of the 22 nurses actually followed the instructions. The nurses fully knew the drug was unapproved and the maximum dosage. It was also against hospital policy to follow any doctor's orders, especially those from ones they didn't know, over the phone. Luckily, the drug the nurses thought they were administering to patients was just saline solution, labeled as the unapproved drug in the experiment. Interestingly, when a different group of 22 nurses were asked what they would have done in the same situation, nearly all of them said they would not have complied with the order. But just how much power does an authority figure have, even when it could just be someone's job at stake? Enough to cause a nurse to knowingly potentially kill a patient? Quite a few other experiments have shown the same power of authority, but are beyond the scope of this video. What's creepy about this is nearly all humans have a tendency to follow orders from a figure of authority and ignore their own personal judgment in many different situations. But what happens when authority is abused? What happens when people just follow orders? Number 2. Japanese Unit 731. During World War II and the Second Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese had collected a large number of prisoners of war, which mostly included Chinese prisoners. Since they were going to execute the prisoners anyway, they decided they may as well conduct experiments on them, and thus began sending them to Unit 731, where they were literally referred to and viewed as human logs. Horrible experiments were conducted on these prisoners of war, such as infecting them with tuberculosis, anthrax, and other deadly forms of bacteria, and then performing a vivisection on them, which is basically a dissection while the person is still alive without administering any kind of anesthesia. Ugh. Their goal was to understand these diseases and how they progress better. That's not all they did though. Allegedly, other horrible experiments were performed, such as burying their prisoners alive, filling their veins with air, and even forcing them to hang upside down until they died. Number 1. Project MK Ultra. Project MK Ultra, also known as the CIA's mind control program, was a project that began in the 1950s with the goal of understanding how to, well, control people's minds. They conducted experiments on unwitting US and Canadian citizens, many of which had no idea they were being tested at all, in an effort to figure out which, if any, drugs, especially LSD and or techniques such as hypnosis or various forms of torture, could be used to gain intelligence or weaken an individual for other means through mind control. A large part of the project was the CIA using front organizations and things like prostitutes to administer LSD to people, even normal American citizens, without them knowing, and just seeing what happened. Its scope of projects was limited quite a bit in 1964 and completely stopped in 1973. The CIA tried to destroy a large amount of its evidence, but a large part of it became available due to the Freedom of Information Act and special Senate hearings to investigate the CIA's activities. When the government decided to begin investigating itself. Even though the project has long been halted, it's still a bit disturbing that a huge part of the US government willingly carried out a mass mind control experiment on its citizens. Crave more mysteries? Watch our top 5 biggest animal mysteries ever video, if you haven't already. Or jump on our mystery playlist and discover how aliens may have saved Earth from a nuclear catastrophe. Twice.